Yes.
Okay.
All ready for the going on.
Good. Over to you, Les.
Now, thank you. I'm honoured to see so many of you here this evening. Yes, I was 18 years Mendip warden, and then thankfully Jim has come back to take over as Mendip Hills AOMB manager and has rebuilt the Hill service again. You see, Mendip is one of those places that gets into you. You can take the boy off of Mendip, but you can't take Mendip out of the boy, and it gets into you. My grandfather was a Mendipper. He was born in 1903 in the village of Morton. And he grew up on Mendip. He was timber hauling in his younger years before he moved to North Somerset. He was a heavy horse man. He was a farmer. And that's where I grew up in North Somerset. I knew all about Mendip when I was about so high, about what he'd done on Mendip and all these other bits and pieces. But you see, the Mendip Hills my grandfather knew is completely different to the Mendip Hills that we know today, which is completely different to the Mendip Hills I can remember when I came back up here in about 1990. So this little story belonged originally to Tom Elkin, who was the first warden. And Tom had this slideshow that was aimed at people off of the hill, as is this. I'm giving it to a domestic audience tonight. And you know all about, you know a lot about Mendip, but there's a lot of people that don't, and that's what this one was all about. You see, with a time tunnel, there is no beginning, there is no end. It is constant. And so, like this landscape, my slideshow has evolved. I still call it a slideshow. It has evolved, and it takes in a lot of what I call the history, the mystery, the myth, and the magic of Mendip, because it is a very, very special place. And so it is that we look at Mendip Hills through the time tunnel. I'll put all the spanners up there because they're tools in the toolbox, and you take them out when you need them, all right? Especially when you're talking to people outside of the area. So here we go. I can remember Jim saying to me, do you know, he said, if you took away those dry stone walls, you could be anywhere.
Yeah.
But with those dry stone walls, you're either in Yorkshire, Derbyshire, or Mendip. Anybody from Yorkshire and Derbyshire this evening? No, but I know that people come down here, they are really, really quite happy about all of this. So that's what we've got. Now, one other question I've got, how do I move these slides on?
Sheila.
There we are. There we are. It was once said about me at Yo Valley by a communications officer down there. He said, this is Les Davies, and what he doesn't know about the Mendip Hills, he makes up. And I thought, that's a rather cruel indictment, isn't it? Yeah, you can remember that. That was Graham Keating. And I've used that one ever since, where what Les Davies doesn't know about the Mendip Hills, he makes up. That's not correct, all right? But it's a funny little quip. So here we are, looking at, if we go back one, please, to the first slide. If we're looking out across the Mendip Plateau, all right, the flat, it's Mendip, not Mendips, right? It's the Mendip Plateau. And we're looking across just outside of Priddy at this sort of flat-topped hill which runs all the way through. Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, designated in 1972, and is undergoing changes now as we speak. And anybody who wants to know a little bit more about that, have a chat to Jim. But Mendip is not just the AOMB, the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, it's also the rest of it. It's Eastern Mendip, it goes right the way out to Frome. And if we want to, as well, we're taking Breandown, and we're taking Steephome and Flathome into the same sort of geology as well. So that's what I want to do, is I want to start the story, the birth of a hill. So we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, down on the beach, 416 million years ago, during the Devonian period. And what we now know as Mendip, in fact, the British Isles, was somewhere south of the equator, on a coastal plain that was alongside a very shallow sea. Massive amounts of rock debris being washed down off of the mountain range, going out across what we now know as Devon, and the Devonian series of sandstones were actually born. And I want to talk more about those a little bit later on because they are very, very important. Next slide if I can, please. Now, from 416 million years ago, let's leap forward to 350 million years ago. Still south of the equator somewhere. Everything is still floating around. Nothing has really tied itself down. The water levels have risen now, and the mud that was in there has settled into the bottom, and that has got millions and millions of tiny little sea creatures in it. And they get squashed up and turned into limestone. Any geologists amongst you tonight? Because that is Jurassic, all right? I cheated. I took a piece of Jurassic limestone and put it in there because I wanted that ammonite. But it's the same sort of stuff. You've got this black rock limestone, which is containing a massive amount of tiny sea creatures that sank to the bottom of the ocean. And that's very interesting because you see the fuel cans next to it. That's where most of our oil reserves come from. It's from that particular period in time. And when we pump them all out, there ain't going to be any left because we don't make it anymore. All right? Because that's why they call it the fossil fuel. So we go to the next one, please. Right, 300 million years ago, we have a massive upheaval. The tectonic plates, all those things that are floating around underneath the surface of the Earth, and they start to collide and they start to heave up into a mountain range which will become Mendip. And there it is, it's been heaved up, comes right up the top, and that's when we get something that is probably, in new money, at least another 300 metres higher than it is at the moment. And this is the first stage of it being a mountain range. So we go on to the next one, please. Rock of Ages. So Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in the excellent example of what happens when the tectonic plates collide. You can see there the rock strata, which has been heaved up. Go across to Cheddar Gorge and have a look at the rock strata there, which is running from south to north. And somewhere up in the middle, on Blackdown, is where the two met. And that's what happens. It all cracked open. And that's what happened with the tectonic plates. Look at this side of the hill. This is what I call the rippled and torn landscape of North Somerset, where you get this ridge and vale, where all those rocks are buckled and heaved in behind it. You've only got to look at Burrington Combe to see that, about how everything got buckled and twisted together. So that's the rock strata there. Can we have the next one, please? Oh gosh, Triassic period. We're on about 200 million years ago now. The Triassic period was that hot, dry period of Earth's evolution. There was only one continent, and this is where Burrington Combe originates from. Burrington Combe is a wadi, a dried up riverbed from this particular period in time. Very, very hot, wet winters, violent thunderstorms coming down through, masses of water that get pushed down through. How many of you have seen Lord of the Rings when the elven princess has Frodo with her, and she says to the Dark Riders, if you want him, come and get him, and around the corner comes this massive tsunami coming down through. I don't say it would have been that dramatic in Burrington Combe, but it would have been pretty dramatic. I wouldn't have wanted to be there stewing the way of it, that's for sure. And so this is what happens. So we get this great gouged out riverbed which comes all the way down and spreads out all this debris over the area of North Somerset and much wider. So the Triassic period, it's pretty hot. This is when the early dinosaurs start to appear. The oldest one of the dinosaurs was found in Bristol. It's called a Mebabrasaurus, I think, but it's one of those that's right up on the top of Clifton. And it was during this Triassic period that it lived. Can we have the next one, please? Jurassic, all right? So, water levels start to come up. Global warming is nothing new. I don't say that we haven't affected it, but global warming is nothing new. And so the sea levels start to rise, and they start to rise. And it ain't just a little bit, a couple of meters, and when we were talking a lot. What was a mountain range now has been turned into an archipelago, which is lots of little islands that are sticking up out of the water. And swimming in between these are some of the little early dinosaurs that are making their way around. And so, there we are. We've got the Jurassic period. We're talking now about 200 million years ago, something like that. Next one, please, if you can. Now, what has T-Rex got to do with Jurassic, as I always used to ask the school children? Well, everything, they say. Well, no, because he wasn't around then. He didn't appear until the Cretaceous period. And at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago, the Big Bang happened. The incoming asteroid struck the Earth somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. A massive, almost thermonuclear type of explosion. Rocks, debris, everything going up into the air, blotting out the sun, acid rain, and all the other bits and pieces that we would associate with a nuclear explosion. In doing so, it wipes out all of the dinosaurs. And it wipes them out because it destroys their food source, knocks out the sunlight, knocks out everything else, and the only thing really that's going to survive is that which is underground or in the sea. This then becomes the age of the mammals. Had it not been for that 65 million years ago, dinosaurs may well still be roaming the earth, all right? So it's that period in time. So 65 million years ago, my plastic dinosaur, he really does, he features in most of the talks I do, especially for the school children. And I have to be very careful with it, because sometimes it gets picked up by mistake. And the next one, please. Now, this is Quaternary. Why am I still in the pool? Well, the sea levels now started to drop about 2.6 million years ago, and Mendip has started to come out of the ocean again. So we have a system there where we're going into the ice ages. The Quaternary period is the period of Earth's evolution that we are in at the moment. So we have ice age, interglacial, ice age, interglacial. The last ice age ended 10,000 years ago. There will be another one. There will be another one. Maybe not, for a few more thousand years, if there is still an Earth by then, but there will be. As soon as maybe the Earth goes off balance slightly, the weather patterns change, there will be another ice age. We've had many ice ages, but nothing like this one that was about 10,000 years ago. So if we can go to the next slide, please. It was very cold. And during this period, early Neanderthals started to make themselves known. Neanderthals were very heavily featured, large noses, to be able to take in the air and warm it up. They were very adapted in living in these cold conditions. And so we go through cold period, warm period, cold period. And the next slide, please, if you would. This is when Cheddar Gorge is formed. Now, there are all sorts of theories about the formation of the Cheddar Gorge. Some say, oh, it was a cave that collapsed in. Others will say something else. The truth is, it was a riverbed. And that was cut down through that limestone rock, which was easily eroded. And it took millions and millions of years to do it. It wasn't a 5-minute job. And it would go down through, and you've only got to look at the road going down Cheddar Gorge. You don't have to be Einstein to work out with the serpentine method the way it went. The other one there is an excellent example of those rocks that I talked about earlier on. Landslip quarry, on the right-hand side has got a very sort of long slope to it, but on this side is very sheer, and that's where the rock dropped away here to give you that slope, that scree slope on the front side. So that was the setup. Excuse me a moment. Everybody hanging on for the next word. So, Cheddar Gorge, completed by the end of the last ice age. One of the earliest places where people began to live. And early man, and I say man in its widest possible context, walked out of Africa and across the continent and came across the land bridge before the end of the ice age. Because when the ice age ended and the water level started to come up, this is when we got cut off, right? So this is what it's all about. So they are starting to live in the bottom of Cheddar Gorge. Next slide if we could, please. Farming. The biggest thing to change our lives. And this started about 11,000 years ago in what we call the Fertile Triangle, which is Iran, Iraq over there in the Middle East, when nomadic tribes decided to settle down. Probably the prey that they were hunting had moved on, the climate had changed, everything had changed, and so they decided they'd start growing beans and so on and so forth. Farming has changed the way of life. As ever, it was late arriving here. It didn't arrive here probably until the New Stone Age, towards several thousand years back, admittedly, but it was 11,000 years ago that it started. It changed our life. It meant that we could, as people, go about our daily routine of doing something else without having to go out and hunt for everything all day long. Hunter-gatherer was starting to go, and farming moved on and is still the biggest user of the countryside. It may interest you to know that it's less than 1% of our population are involved in food production and farming today. And that is really something that we need to take a darn good look at. Anyway, bang the drum, move on to the next slide, please. Now, this is the Bronze Age. So we're talking about 400, 300 BC of the age when we've gone from the Neolithic, the New Stone Age, into the Bronze Age, where they're starting to make tools of bronze. They're still using flints, but they're making tools of bronze. These are the round barrows. These are the burial mounds of the ancient Celt chieftains. And the great and well-to-do were buried. Their burnt remains were actually put in here, and they were buried. And the ancients believed that the way to the afterlife was through the underworld. And so the underworld of Mendip, land of the deep, is what it's all about. So they were put up on the high points. They were also a massive statement of ownership and commitment to this landscape. This is our landscape. This is where we bury our revealed dead, and we put them up. They're also used in navigation points and so on and so forth. And you still see them around today, which is amazing, really. That lot going down towards Shippham itself. And the next slide, please. Iron Age. The next stage then is the Iron Age, when the people are now starting to manufacture items out of iron. This is not ugly. These are very, very talented and skilled people. And nowadays we realise that just how important they were, what crafts that they had. And this is of Dolbury Hill Fort. From a military point of view, tactically very, very good. Commands the high ground on the spur, overlooks one of the main passes to the Mendip Hills now, which is still the A38. Logistically, not very good. Where's all your water? Down in the bottom of the stream. So if you want a glass of water in the middle of the night, you've got to get out and go all the way down the stream and come all the way back again. There are no springs up here. But the interesting thing about it, can you make out some series of lines in here? Let me tiptoe through these cables. Can you make it out there and there? These are pillow mounds from the late Middle Ages, where they taught rabbits to burrow. We taught them to burrow. We put them in these pillow mounds so that we could easily harvest them, and we could net them. Anybody done any ferreting here? Yeah, when you put the net, that's it. Yeah, Bill, biggest poacher there ever. Right. That's about right, Bill, no? Yeah. So, yeah, those of us that have done a little bit of ferreting, what you did, you put the ferret down in and you netted all the holes around, and as soon as the ferret went in, wallop, out come the bunnykins, and that's it, you've got them in the nets. And that's how they did it. Of course, the story occurs with that, of course, you know, all the local population were fed with meat from these warrens. No, they weren't. The meat that from these warrens went to the lord of the manor, and all the oiks were kept out by the warrener, who lived, tiptoe through here again, in this little place here, which was the warrener's house. Now he had a garden in there which had very high walls all the way around it, obviously to stop the rabbits getting in. But he also had one story live-in, another one for storage, and he also had an observation story right at the top, where he could actually look out over the top of it. That is going way ahead of that Iron Age occupation here. This was here when the Romans arrived. Can we go to the next one, please? Lead. Why did the Romans come to Mendip? When did the Romans come to Mendip? I can tell you, on a Tuesday. A little girl told me that when I was giving a talk at the school. And I said to the school children, can anybody tell me when the Romans arrived? Yes, they'd done all about the Romans, and a little girl put her hand up and said on a Tuesday. Well, how can I refute that? It was undoubtedly in the year AD 43 when the Roman invasion took place. And what they came for was this stuff. It was lead and silver and various other bits and pieces. Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, actually says that, yeah, they came here for the mineral wealth. And that's what Mendip gave. Mineral wealth, grazing, all those things that people could take from the landscape. It is the classic example of human interaction with the landscape. And we look at it today and say, isn't it wonderful, isn't it natural? No, it's all been created by our predecessors. And so this is what it's all about. GLB, Glastonbury Lake Village. And that's where those fishing weights came from. And they came from the Glastonbury Lake village was there during the Iron Age, out on the Somerset levels, which I'll tell you more about later on, because there's a very, very important story which goes with that. And the next slide, please. Charter House. This square that's here, some people have said to me, oh, that was the town field. That was the centre, that was the forum. No, it wasn't. This is probably a sheepfold from about 1180, something like that, when the Carthusian brothers came and settled within this area and started sheep farming on the top of Mendip. The interesting thing about this is the town field. This was a Roman settlement that was bigger than Bath was at the time. Can you see that little holloway down through there? That holloway is a Roman street in the town. And when it gets very, very dry, like it is at the moment, you can still just about make out in the landscape some of the patterns of the old buildings that were there. Because it all fell in and it all disappeared and went away. And if I can have the next slide, please. This rather vertigo-inducing slide shows the old amphitheatre that's up on the top of Wren's Batch. Not originally a Roman site. It was probably a British site. It was taken over by the Romans. I've been there. There was an east gate and a west gate. They would use it for cockfighting, gambling, all that sort of stuff. Undoubtedly, it was stamped on top, as was the rest of the fortification. As geophysics now tells us, there's a lot more underneath the surface than we ever knew before. And that's what the Romans did. They came along and they put that in, they knocked it all down flat and said, this is ours now, and you conform to what we do. Tribes around here were probably pretty Romano-British anyway before the Romans arrived. So, you know, it's a gentle sort of takeover. And there are thoughts that the Romans were invited in by some of the warring tribes at the time to try and get one over the other. We'll never know. There isn't anybody around left to tell us. So we've got to go with the history. Next slide, if I can, please. Sheep. I'm talking about sheep this evening, about the farming methods of sheep. I'm reading at the moment a book which is Wessex from 1000 AD. And during the Middle Ages, they talk about Mendip because it was a royal hunting forest. And Mendip was a rough place to live then, not only because of the climate, but the fact that it was a royal forest. And in 1297, there were lots of complaints from those people living on the top of Mendip that they were being fined by the foresters, forerunners of Mendip wardens, who, when they went in to actually take the firewood from the forest. So it was a rough, old, tough time. But sheep were a big thing. And sheep weren't just there for the wool. They were there to actually add fertility to the ground. The very thin soils of Wiltshire, the chalk soils, were actually enriched by sheep. Big flocks of sheep that would dung and urinate on the ground and actually provide more fertility maybe than cow dung would do today. So that's what they were here for. But it was the sheep farming of the Carthusian monks who really showed the way forward. And as I say, it was about 1180. Was it Henry I that was involved in the death of Thomas of Becket? I think so, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Well, somebody rid me of this troublesome priest, so they went out and killed him. No, he said, I didn't mean you to do that. No, said the Pope, you go off you go off now. You go off on a crusade and repent for all your sins. And he said, I can't do that, I've got a country to run. And so, after all these sort of excuses and the lingering come out, the Pope said, right, you settle now some of these religious centres into Britain. And that's where the Carthusian monks come in. And that's probably where a charter house comes in, because it was given a charter from the royal forest. Next slide, if I can, please. Mendip is a pretty hostile place, high rainfall, low temperatures, thin soil. Autumn begins probably several weeks early before anybody else, and spring starts several weeks later. This is Pretty Fair. For those of you who can remember Pretty Fair, and I'm sure everybody here will have gone to Pretty Fair at some stage. 1348 was when the fair moved from the city of Wells. There was probably a wool fair long before that. But 1348 was the date that we identified with it. And every year, sheep were sold at Pretty Fair. Now, they don't need it now because you can sell sheep on eBay, so you don't have to bother about that. But what you've got is a tradition here where farmers came together. And if you start to look as well at some of the history of pretty fair, and especially the lead miners, when they would go down there and drink themselves into oblivion and have a fight. There is a one recorded case of a miner returning from the fair at the end of the day, and suddenly realised he hadn't had a scrap during the day, so he turns on his heels and he walks back into Purdy again and picks the first fight that he comes into. That's what they were like. Mendip was a lawless place. It was in fact the most lawless place in Somerset. The law didn't exist. But that was Mendip. We like to think times have changed a bit now. Or have they? Now, John Small, one of the Mendip farmers, farming about 1,000 acres of dry land right up on the top of Mendip. In the back is that Roman enclosure, the hill fort, and he's still farming very much in the traditional kind of way, because that's the way you've got to work on some of this land. You've got to work with it. And the next slide, if you could, please. Dry stone walls, remember I mentioned them earlier on. A little bit about the dry stone walls. The enclosures period of the late 17 and early 1800s meant that Mendip was enclosed mainly in a very, very short period of time, with lots of navvies, ex-navigators from the canal building being used to put them up. They weren't put up in any great, in any great fashion, but they did it. This is Tina Vance work when she was a contractor working for herself before she became assistant warden with me, way, way back. And now, with the Mendip ploughing match, the walling is back into the competition. We still have the walling competition. We have Mendip Hills MBE volunteers coming in, Mendip Society, contractors. Bill Selway himself was started by us and won many years as champion dry stone walling. So it is a little bit of something that at the time was considered to be enclosing the area. Now we look at it as being something quite wonderful. Next slide if we can, please. The lead condenser flues at Charter House. Of course, people tell me this is where the Romans can smelted the lead. No, they didn't. No, the Romans didn't do that. This was done in the 1800s. This is Cornish tin mining technology that took the flight, which was the smoke, which is still lead laden, all the way up through a series of tunnels where it cooled and condensed, and then the smoke went up the chimney right at the end of it. That was not being done for any conservation reason. It was done purely for that, because they had been sued by Mr. Baker, a local farmer, for polluting the atmosphere and polluting the grass that killed his livestock. Probably one of the earliest environmental actions that were taken legally back in the 1800s. And so these are still very, very important monuments. Incidentally, I know you can't see it very well here, but those of you that have gone up, and I'm sure you have done, number 1 and number 2 flues are stoned up at the end. During the Second World War, Bristol City Archives were boxed up, nailed up and put in those flues to get them away from some of the bombing raids. And amazingly, at the end of the war, they were still there, because the Mendipers hadn't twigged on that, but everything else on them did. Well, all the vehicles that were lined out alongside the road, ready to go to D-Day, Operation Overlord, Army filled them up by day, Mendipers emptied the tanks by night. So that's what it was all about. The next slide, if we can, please. Take a look at this one from here. What is an industrial landscape. Jim tells me that this is probably one of the hardest used sites on Mendip, because so many people go down there. But look at that black banks there, the Smitham, just here. That was left over from the lead mining. Had that gone into the Bristol Ring Road, we would never have known that, but that's what the destiny of all that was going to be. It was going to go in as ballast. But it was too expensive to move, thankfully. But you've got a network in there. Once we finish screwing things up, nature takes it back over, and the biodiversity of it increases amazingly. And that's exactly what happened there. One of the finest sites for adder, grass snakes. You've also got field vole in there, you've got harvest mice, you've got corn crake, you've got all of the newts that are in there. It really is an amazing place to go and visit. But it gets hammered quite badly. And then up in the corner, just here, is the remains of an enclosure, probably from the Iron Age. probably from an Iron Age exposure. All right,
Sorry.
that's all right. Of North Somerset, with the reservoir lying in the bottom, 14 and a half odd miles around the outside of it, created during the beginning of the 20th century to feed water into Bristol. About 72 million gallons a day, that's 324 million litres of water comes out of Mendip, roughly. It's probably going to be slightly less at the moment, because of the rainfall and the percolation down through those thick limestone beds, and then the risings and the runoff and everything else that goes with it. The boreholes, and so it is. But look, that is a completely different landscape to Mendip Top. It is a much gentler landscape, it's an enclosed landscape, it is a far more fertile landscape than the top of Mendip. But if we can go to the next slide, please. This is the very top of Mendip, 325 metres above sea level, 1,068. And this is Blackdown. Now this is where some of that old red sandstone has poked through the surface and been worn down over the years. So this is heath. That skyline has probably not changed a lot since Saxon times, because there's not enough depth of soil to be able to support a large amount of trees, afforestation. But the thing we do know about that one, that it was a decoy site during the Second World War, and that was a bit of Temple Meads and Cannons Marsh that had been moved 20 miles south of Bristol with light boxes and all that sort of stuff that went with it. And it is a very, very interesting story that goes with it. So if you ever get the chance to get a book called Somerset versus Hitler, that was written by Donald Brown, who's now not with us, he was a Mendip Ranger. He recorded all of this stuff and all the memories that went with it. We don't really, as Sir John Wills said, we all remember things that didn't really happen. And that's exactly what has happened about it. You know, with all these things have passed into, remember the history, the mystery, the myth and the magic. So the next slide if you can, please. Quarrying, always a real hot potato. And it's the Carboniferous limestone of Mendip that is so valuable. There's only a couple of quarries within the AOMB, the rest of them are further out east. But it's only a very, very sort of special type of limestone that was used. When we had can you remember when we had a British steel industry in Wales? Yeah. Before it was all sort of done away with. Well, that's where most of this stuff went. It went into the steel furnaces. So the quarrying industry is still there. The vast amount of it is out further east. And it's surprising actually where limestone crops up. A new breakfast cereal, in the makeup for women and men maybe, and all those other bits and pieces that are going on. It's surprising, you know, where we actually get this limestone. Can we go to the next one, please? Charterhouse. Nothing like a nice straight dry stone wall. And the reason that is there is because it's above a quarry. So that's where it just goes along the edge of the quarry. But there, Charterhouse, the little chapel of St. Hugh's, 1908, that was converted to a church of convenience by the Reverend Lambert Menzies from Cherry. So it gave all those people up on the top there, especially the miners, somewhere to go and pray. The school itself, which is in a patch of ground formerly known as Baker's Paddock, was set up in about 1861 and closed down in 1947. Just about still within living memory. John Small went to school there, and I asked him many times before, what was it like? He said, I don't know. I spent most of my time in the corner with a dunce's hat on looking at the wall. And so that's what it was. It was a yard of strap is worth a mile of talk to a Mendip lad, is what once said. And that's what it was. It was a pretty rough, tough landscape. Now, the centre of the AOMB service, now Charterhouse Centre, where hundreds, if not more, children come every year to come and enjoy the Mendip Plateau. And incidentally, the other one about Second World War, I tiptoe over these very carefully, is this crossroads here. This was part of the Home Guard Defence Plan. You don't know it, but Operation the Sea Lion, which was a German invasion of mainland Britain, would have stopped there, because the Home Guard would then run out landmines and tank mines and necklets, which is strings with grenades on them, and all the tanks would come to a halt. That was the plan. Obviously, it never got put into action. But that plan is still there. That plan is still at Charterhouse, hidden away now. But that's a little bit of the continuing story of Mendip. Right up on the tap, centrally and operationally, very, very important to the AOMB. And can we go to the next one, please? Human activity is not now just confined to people working the land. The largest earner of money in the countryside now is tourism and leisure. And the foot and mouth incident taught us that rather harsh lesson. And so it is. You've got lots of people that are coming to Mendip, horse riding, cycling. Next one, please. They cause problems. Sheep were in. That's one ewe that had been attacked by a dog, snout ripped right out, look, ear gone, savage round the neck. And I'm afraid it happens on a fairly regular basis when people come out to the countryside who do not know what the countryside is all about. Are there animals in the countryside? I used to get asked, oh yes. And that's what it's all about. So this sort of thing was never going to be tolerated, and I'm afraid it still does happen. Next slide, if I can, please. Wow! Top of Burrington Combe on a sunny day. Look closer. Those are all cars that we were driving back in the 1980s, and that's when it was taken. Has it got any better, Jim? No, it hasn't, has it? Cars are still the biggest problem, and car parking is one of the biggest issues that we've got. And so therefore, it also brings with it a load of problems. Next slide if we can, please. Theft. Theft, local crime, rural crime. That was one bloke's business that was stolen, stripped out and dumped in the countryside. And I'm afraid it still goes on. It's one of those things that does happen. But way back when, we had a lot of success with the police and reduced, I think it was about 54% of the crime on Mendip by people keeping their eyes open. And it still goes on today. The links between the AOMB service and the police are strong, in fact probably stronger than they ever were before. And so hopefully this has no place on Mendip. And can I have the next one, please? Now, you remember in the beginning we talked about a story which started 416 million years ago. In my timeline, when I do that, that is a 1 meter rule, so that's about 10 million years. So I run this out over 40 metres up a dry stone wall, and I'm able to tell people about it. I did say that I would tell you a little bit of a story that is not directly related to Mendip, but the Somerset levels. The reason we all speak English is because of Alfred, King Alfred the Great, who hid in the marshes to get away from the Danes, and who brought together the men of Somerset and of Dorset and of Wiltshire and thoroughly beat the Danes and made Guthrum convert to Christianity through the Treaty of Wedmore. I tell people in Wedmore, the last time you were in the news was 878. And some of them think, no, can't. But that is what it's all about. Alfred's dream was of an English-speaking nation, one nation, and his son managed to achieve that, and we have built on that ever since. That comes from Somerset. Land of the summer people, land of the summer livers. And that is 1 million years, and if I go to the next slide, how long have we been around? Next to nothing. We are a gnat bite on time. We've probably been around 500,000 years, probably, maybe a couple of million years, but it's nothing when you start to look at 416 million years worth of evolution of the Mendip landscape. And the final ones, please, if I could. This is just a shot of Mendip with Crook Peak in the distance on that south side, giving you some sort of idea that they're way all back of the limestone that is the Mendip Hills. And the next one, please. And the tranquil bit in around Priddy on an autumn morning when the mist just settles down. And the next one, please. Or when you're in the winter and you're looking out across the Vale of Avignon and the sea goes on forever and ever and ever, and you think it's such a magical place. And the next one, please, is westcountryman.org.uk, which is me. And the next one is, thank you for watching. Dolly the sheepdog. Dolly the sheepdog. Dolly the sheepdog is John Small's dog. Dolly had a deformed lower jaw, and you can see that there. Nobody ever went near Dolly when she was sat on the club bike. But she is the spirit of the working dog on Mendip. She is the tribute to the working people on Mendip. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching.
way of communicating with people is just fantastic. So very much thanks for that.
Can I just say a little thing?
Yeah.
When Jim Hardcastle went for his job, right, he was interviewed. Right, he was interviewed, and they said to him about Mendip, and he said, "What you can't take away from me is my enthusiasm that burns within me for this place, and that's what happens to everybody that touches Mendip. It gets into you."
And I think actually, the way you speak about it, it makes all of us proud to be part of it.
Well, you are, proud to be Mendipers, proud to be a part of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but to live here and know that it's just up there and walk up onto it.
You say what Davis doesn't know about the Mendip Hills he makes up.
We all think we know a bit, but you tell us a lot more, so it's fantastic. Do we have any questions that anybody would like to ask? We'll say it louder if we need to for everyone to hear.
Yeah, I will say that I'm deaf.
Are you?
Sorry? Oh, that was so predictable, wasn't it? Yes, sorry.
Go on, Jim.
Well, it's a silly little question, but when were rabbits introduced? I always thought it was the Normans bringing them in.
Yeah, they were the Normans brought
It was
them.
the
Yeah, it was the Normans. Yeah, they were the ones who brought them over. I mean, there was some talk that maybe the Romans did, but yeah, it was mainly the Normans, and that's when you get this warren. So you get Charterhouse Warren, Ubley Warren, and all those other warrens. It was all to do with the warren inside of it.
Actually, we were looking at some deeds, weren't we, Mary, of Blagdon Court recently when it was sold. Like with both deeds, it was a sale, an auction sale, wasn't it? And it mentions the fact that the court has this very valuable warren.
Yes, they were very
It
valuable.
was well known for conus.
Yes, they called them conus, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And they'd be taken to the market and made money for the imported.
Yes, and of course that was turned into felt, wasn't it? Hats and so on and so forth, the skins. And it was a very valuable asset.
Jim, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Because in the little book that Sheila gave us, the chap who was the son of the gamekeeper for the Hill family and who went to school in Charterhouse School, and the headmistress had 10 children of her own.
Lukins,
It was quite
yes.
extraordinary. But that little book was absolutely fascinating. The lead and the donkeys that were carrying the lead, pigs or whatever they're called, down to Uphill.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, that is so fascinating. I mean, we'd love to hear you again, Les, about the latter, the Hill family, the Bacon, and the Wills, and the way they brought up the estates, really for hunting, that latter period, when it was sort of hunting and shooting and everything all over Mendip. And then the way that's disappeared over the years.
And again, it's constantly evolving. Yes. Something will come along and take over, and then something takes over again. Incidentally, if you've got a bit of an interest in maybe the macabre, maybe the morbid, keep your eye open for a book that's coming out on Mendip. All right, I'll say no more than that. It's been coming out, being done by the AOMB, and it was written by Sue Gearin and Les Davies. And it's about well, how seamless was that?
Very nice. Very nice.
But that will be coming out, and that's some of the sort of some of the glorious stories. But this is it, Mary. You're absolutely right. This is a time tunnel. No beginning, no end. All sorts of things that are going on, and then when we're no longer here, somebody else will be up here trampling all over the landscape.
I think it was Mrs. Lukins, the head teacher up at Charterhouse. She had 10 children in quite quick succession. So she lived next door, and she'd pop out to feed a child, and the 12-year-olds in the class would then take over and look after, or they'd be sent to look after the babies.
I've got a copy of the school, or extracts then from the school report, and they make quite frightening reading, really. And that's where that term, a yard of strap is worth a mile of talk to a Mendip lad.
It was the poor final head teacher who got snowed in, basically, and nobody went near her for ages. And in the end, she just said, put in her resignation, so that had enough.
There we go. Yes.
I'm probably slightly behind the curve, but is it likely that one of the reasons the lead miners like to scrap is not just that they like to scrap, it was the effect of lead on the brain?
Medical man. Right, it was. It was all to do with lead poisoning. One of the symptoms of lead poisoning is violent aggression. And spontaneous as well. It's not sort of something that comes out, it just happens. The great Charterhouse murder, but I don't want to give too much away about that. Probably as a result of that. But yeah, and that's why Mendip was such a lawless place. They were forever scrapping. Policemen wouldn't go down into Shippen to arrest anybody on their own because they'd end up being shot down a mine. So that's it. It's absolutely right. Yeah.
I was always told that Blagden was a sort of Klondike, and that it was full of miners and easy ladies of easy virtue.
That's why we moved here. I was told as well by this lady.
What do you mean was? It would have been. It would have been. You see, you are looking at Mendip way back when, and it was a rough. The Klondike had nothing on this place. It was rough, tough, and nasty place.
Hannah Moore came in to try and sort us out, didn't she?
Well, I am told even up until the Second World War, people on Mendip were considered to be somewhat strange, and then down in Cheddar and other places they would say they're coming off.
We were strange compared to Cheddar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something must be
That is
done.
strange.
Something must be done for the folk of Shippen, for they are wretched almost beyond those of Cheddar, said Hannah.
What is in the soil there? We're all growing vegetables out of this lead.
Yeah, I remember that one. I can remember the scare. And I can remember the cartoon that went with it down in Shippen. And there was a gravestone to a lady that had died like about 99 or something. And somebody's leaning on the wall and saying, "There you go, look, another sudden death." And I think that summed it up. Yeah.
Jim had his hand up way back.
Yeah.
Yes, Jim.
Les, your presentation, the images, I need to send you some more modern images, but that's it, that's part of the time tunnel, isn't it?
It is. They are dated images.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what it's all about. Because somebody is going to take that and they're going to bring it up to speed.
Yeah.
Because that is all part of the story.
But my proper question was, obviously we worked together for many years. What do you think was your greatest success as a Mendip warden? Apart from mentoring myself.
Oh, but working with you, Jeff. No, I really do think, from my point of view, my grandfather was still alive when I came to come back to Mendip. For him, that was a huge amount of pleasure that family would go back on Mendip. I think the biggest thing was the way that I was actually accepted on Mendip. I was from farming stock. I was from, the people knew about my family background. I was accepted. I did a lot of good work. I met a lot of really good people. I think really the work on Blackdown with the Commons was probably the shining bit with it. That and the rural crime issue. And here the other thing as well was the involvement with the rescue team, which you've taken that over, all right? The mountain rescue side, the rescue side. And I think that there are so many things, I don't know whether I could actually pull one from the heap. So it's just that whole thing sticks together. Yeah, special, really special.
And what was your biggest challenge?
Sorry?
What was your biggest challenge?
Oh, biggest challenge? Sorry, I am deaf. I'll tell you, the little cartoon about the old boy who is stood there on his walking stick, and in front of him is a Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper looks at him and says, "I am deaf." And the old boy says, "So am I, so I will speak very slowly." So, yeah, sorry, I'm Jim. Yeah. What was that question again?
And what was your biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge, I think, here was the foot and mouth. The biggest challenge was the foot and mouth. I would look at my map at the end of the day, and I would work out where the last site had been, and I would put my compass all the way around the outside of it, and I would look, okay, this is what we got here, this is what we could be having there. I've got to say my military training helped immensely on that with intelligence gathering and mapping and everything else as well. But that, I think, was the biggest challenge, was the foot and mouth, and how we were going to get through it, and how we were going to come out the other side, because there was no certainty about it at all. Thankfully.
We were saved, weren't we, because that dealer didn't go to market. He was in Beaconsfield or something,
Yeah.
and he didn't go up to Carlisle, which was he
Yeah.
usually did do.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't go buy cattle up there and come back, I think was...
Would have saved us. A lot of fortune, a lot of luck. Well, I mean, we all make our own luck, but there's some that gets handed to us. And that was definitely the day there.
One more question, if you've got... John?
Les, has it ever been worked out how much the volume of water is under the Mendips?
72 million gallons a day. coming out, roughly 324 million litres of water coming out. Difficult to say actually
Which is
what
in the
is
cage,
there.
isn't it?
No, but that was Willie Stanton who worked that out.
Yeah.
And he worked that out from the rainfall on a square mile or whatever it was, and he was a clever guy, and that's how he worked it out. But the aquifer, that limestone sponge that is Mendip, that's what it's all about. And I don't know whether we actually know that.
Okay.
We had Peter Granville talking to us recently, and he talked about Willie Stanton.
Willie Stanton, yeah, great man. Great man.
What is the state of speleology in Mendip? Because there are so many caves. Is it still a very,
Oh gosh,
very active?
yeah. Geologists reckon they've only found 10%.
Yeah.
So there's still a massive amount out there that hasn't been discovered yet. This is the land of the deep. And so there are things out there we don't... I used to say, we know what's going on in outer space with the Hubble telescope. We know what's down in the bottom of the deepest ocean, but we don't know
What's under our feet?
what's 3 or 4 meters below our feet. And that, doesn't that make it a bit exciting? That is the last frontier.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.